The following is a special presentation of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Welcome to Tough Enough, a recap and breakdown show from the MMA Outsiders, following every episode of The Ultimate Fighter Season 32. Team Grasso versus Team Shevchenko, presented by Playback. And now, here are your hosts, Tom Albano and Zain Bando.
All right, we're on the air here for another edition of Tough Enough. I'm Tom Albano, that's Zain Bando. You know, for all that we thought was going to happen involving Edwin Cooper, when we talked about all the drama from last week's episode, didn't really see a lot of it play out in this week's episode. This week ultimately ended up just being, well, really, it was just a fight episode.
Yeah, that's all it was. And before we get into the fight episode that was and so much more, we would like to remind you guys to please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, if you will, at youtube.com/ETB Network, because we are slowly but surely approaching 1,000 subscribers. As we like to say on every edition of the MMA Outsiders, you can listen to that wherever you get your podcast. This is the special Tough Enough post-Ultimate Fighter Edition live stream. So for all intents and purposes, you can watch or listen to this on YouTube Premium. That's the only way you're going to be able to find it. But for a flagship show, you can listen to it everywhere. Again, it's youtube.com/ETB Network. And of course, if you were listening on the audio-only platforms, be sure to do the exact inverse of that and go over to the YouTube home. And so much more. For those of you who don't know which by now, I'm Zain Bando. That's Tom Albano. We do this recap show every single week, post every episode of The Ultimate Fighter. You can catch my work over at the Sporting News and MMA Knockout. You can catch Tom's work over at Inside an MMA News, and for the PFL website. Now that we've that out of the way, you can also check out all of our other content at etbpodcast.com, where we're pumping out tons of new content surrounding all the different off seasons, including the NBA and the NFL, as we are about 8 weeks away from the start of the NFL season. So a lot of exciting stuff there. Tom, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, we can't forget about Playback. So this show, along with the main show, the MMA Outsiders, and everything else here at the Empty the Bench Network, is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. All right. Now that all that is out of the way, let's just talk about the stuff that happened on the show. So, as you mentioned, wasn't really a lot about the after effects of Edwin Cooper and the drinking drama that went on in the last episode. You just got to see more backstory and strategy planning involving Cooper and Valentina, and then of course involving Myron and Alexa. So just with Edwin Cooper's backstory, he basically has been in combat sports from a young age, and he was consistently successful in it. And again, like with Dana, I'm just wondering, is the pressure becoming too much? The fact that he's been away from his family and such. Ironically, it is that term pressure that was the strategy that was going to help him win, according to he and Valentina, just pressuring Santos with his power and, giving all that pressure and not making it such a distant fight.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was one of the most interesting things, about it, going into this episode. You and I had alluded to it a week ago that we thought this fight was going to be a walk in the park for Santos, which we'll get to the overall fight result in a little bit. But I think you saw a different side of Edwin Cooper, to where it seems to me like when his head is on straight, he takes this very seriously. And you could tell when he was going through, his kind of family history, his Division One wrestling background, and then of course, training at Jackson Wink, which is the home of several current and former UFC champions. You could tell that his confidence level is something that he
Extremely
greatly
high.
is extremely high, and it's something that he takes great pride in, because without confidence, in the position that he's in, you're not going to be successful. And his background, going into the show, proved that. And I thought his story was very
Yeah, no,
interesting. And
you're not going to be.
go ahead, sorry.
No, I said you're right. He's going to. It's going to help him be very successful. It's just a matter of, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like it goes border on egoish, but I guess you need to have an ego to be a great fighter in this sport.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, I think you saw less of an ego from him on this episode compared to last week's
Compared to
episode, which
last
was
week,
a
yeah.
unique change. Yeah, yeah, definitely a unique change. But he's someone that I thought was uniquely interesting, and it seems like somebody that Valentina greatly gr- he did not, obviously if she didn't believe in him, she wouldn't have pressured him in the way that he in the way that she did, rather, in subsequent weeks. So definitely a very interesting nugget there, and just interesting to see kind of a different side of him as well. Very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Although I think Myron had a little bit more of the more interesting backstory, if you
I
will,
would agree with that.
considering the environment that he grew up in, and then moving himself out to Las Vegas as one of his teammates was competing in the UFC. He said that he had come close to competing on the UFC, but just, you know, it just never played out in his favor. As I mentioned last week, he went 13. I think he came into the season 13-1. His only loss was to another alumnus of TUF and Dan Argetta. Uh, as far as his strategy, it's simple. It's the complete opposite of Cooper's. He wanted to keep his distance, and Santos. When we talked about this last week, Santos, if you look at some of his fight footage, some of his time with elephants, he has power.
He does, for sure. And it's something that I think is very well underlooked, and something that I think he realizes he needs to get better at if he wants to be someone who, in his words, is attempting to be a legend out of Brazil. So I mean, you have to give him all the credit in the world from that regard, but just to see the backstory where he came from, his 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 partner, if you will, seems very, very supportive of him. His family definitely seems very supportive of him. I mean, seeing all the trophies and medals he's won in combat competitions over the years was very cool to see, that there's like his own shrine already serving as extra motivation that he can be one of the best fighters in the world one day. So so for sure, I mean, if you were to compare the two backstories, I would say wholeheartedly that his was more interesting as well. Yeah.
All right, so I know it seems very quick that we're getting right into the 5 second countdown, but we mean it that there was really not much to this episode other than
No,
that.
this was easily the most brief episode in terms of filler pre-fight that we've had so far this season.
All right, ready?
Yep.
All right, there's your 5 second avoid the spoiler countdown. I mean, the fight itself, it was pretty good. It was actually a
Yeah,
really good fight, a really interesting fight. So don't get us wrong when we were talking about, the most brief in terms of, pre-fight filler content. I mean, the fight itself was very good. It was very competitive. Ultimately, Myron Santos does end up getting the win. It's very close, though. It wasn't the first round domination that he predicted. It goes 3 rounds. It goes to a split decision. In fact, Myron lost the first round. It was very clear. Cooper scored the takedown almost right away. He was landing the power right away, and then he used his positioning, used his pressure, really limited Santos's offense, pardon me, in that opening round. But the thing that helped Santos was he proved to be the better of the two when it came to making adjustments. Round two, you have Santos. He was told use your power, keep him at bay, like like Alexa told him during the pre-fight strategies, and that's what happened. He prevented the takedowns that continued into the third round. Cooper did get a takedown towards the end of that third round, the last couple of minutes, but I feel like he didn't really do much with it. So judges go to a split decision. Two of them view it in favor of Santos. And Mike, here's my thoughts on the fight. One, I think it was the right call. And two, I'm wondering, and Valentina, you could see it in Valentina in the post-fight conference in the locker room. Did Cooper let the fight slip away from him?
It's a good question. I mean, the third round, you could definitely say that Edwin Cooper should have done more. When there was 2 minutes and 15 seconds to go, I remember vividly they were on their feet and she's screaming for him to go, as in strike, and he's not striking, and he's instantly shooting in. And I was eating a snack and almost maybe want to figuratively, of course, I would never do this. It made me want to figuratively throw something at my screen because I'm like, what in the world is he doing? He knows that this fight's close. He knows that, potentially based on how the judges have it. Obviously, it was a split decision, but there's always that random thought in the back of your head, like, "Oh, am I losing the fight?" And there just wasn't a sense of urgency there, and I think that was the big thing. And Santos, took away his striking for the most part with his leg kicks and stuff, and he's a very well-rounded fighter himself. I just think that Cooper got a little bit too comfortable in there against a guy where he knew that if he made one mistake, he was going to lose. Thankfully, that mistake never came in terms of him getting finished. But still, just a brutal way to go out, considering that you had a golden opportunity with 2 minutes to go, and maybe you had, the fight in the swing stage, and you couldn't do it. So that's one of those things where he's going to have to go back to the drawing board, really watch the tape and say, okay, where did I go wrong? Like, what did I not do? What did I not do in round 3 that I was doing well, successfully in the earlier parts of the fight?
Well, I'll tell you what he. Sorry, Zan. I'll tell you what he didn't do when Valentina got on him for this, because in round 2 he did nothing.
Right.
That's why. In round 2, if he had done something, now maybe the credit to that has to go to Santos in that he adjusted his game plan and kept his distance. But it felt like Cooper just, I don't know. There was something about his performance in the last 2 rounds that just seemed off.
Right. And you could tell that Santos recognized it and capitalized on it. I think if he had a couple more minutes, obviously he didn't, but if he did, he might have won the fight via finish, but obviously it didn't happen. So, that's one of those things where, again, as I just alluded to, Cooper's got to go back to the drawing board. He's got to figure out, okay, where can I pick up the pieces? Because I think even though he's 6-1, and even though Santos seems to be the more experienced fighter at 13 and going into this, I think that Cooper is potentially maybe borderline a UFC caliber fighter that has a couple of missing holes where maybe one more win gives him another chance.
I can see that. He definitely is near UFC caliber. It's just a matter of, one, as you said, figuring out what he did wrong in this fight. Number 2,
but I can tell, by the way, I think Valentina Shevchenko, you'd probably agree with this, was justified to be fuming with 2 minutes to go when they told him to push forward, and he wasn't. He wasn't doing it.
Yeah, no. I mean, like I said, the last 2 rounds, he didn't really do much. You can say, well, he got the takedown in the 3rd round, but I don't think he did much of it. And I know we have this debate about all the time, but when you score a takedown, the terms effective striking and effective grappling, I don't think that takedown was really as effective compared to the striking that Santos was doing in those last 2 rounds, the 3rd round included, when he did get the takedown.
No, I don't think so either. And this is one of the criticisms that I have with Ultimate Fighter fights, and I'm sure you'd probably agree, is that 2-round stipulation, considering that it's not a true professional fight. I would guarantee you that if all these fights were 3 rounds, I bet you the guy on the losing end of a decision would push forward a little bit more, knowing that the fight's a 3-round fight instead of a 2-round fight. I'm not using that as an excuse for Cooper. I'm just using that more as an observation, because like as soon as that first round ends in essentially most of these fights, the second round flies by. So it's almost like the second all these fights start, the race against the clock begins almost instantly. So
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like I was saying before, trying to get my train of thought back. One, he has to recognize what went wrong during this fight. Two, I would say as part of that, he needs to work on his cardio a little bit, because if the reason he wasn't doing much was because he was feeling tired, which he was by the end of the fight, he's got to
yeah,
work on his pacing a little bit. And number three, he can't let rounds slip away from him. When your coach for a round and a half, 2 rounds, he's yelling, "Go, go, go, go," then go.
yeah. Yeah,
So
and it's
I try.
probably has to do with the psyche thing too, because you're probably thinking like, okay, I need to make this next move, but I got my coach screaming at me like, can I put two and two together or can I not? And it seems to me like he was unable to do that in the latter
He's
part of the
struggling.
fight.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
struggling with it. So, I'm not saying he's not ready. Oh, and actually, I'll throw a fourth thing in there. You know, Well, I want to see how he adjusts to this fight. I mean, in the aftermath of this fight, because I'm wondering, is he going to have his head on straight, or is he going to go back to drinking in the house again?
Oh right, yeah, because obviously we're now at the halfway point of the season, so it's not like his antics can't ramp up again. You never know.
Exactly. And when we're talking about, and I hate doing this because Beck even talked about it last week. When we're talking about because I don't want to do guilt by association, but when we're talking about a fighter from Jackson Wink who, we've seen all of Edwin Cooper. We talked about his borderline with the ego and confidence. We talked about, his drinking habit. And meanwhile, the greatest fighter to ever come out of Jackson Wink, as we talked about on MMA Outsiders, is once again in the headlines for a very negative reason. Yeah, it doesn't look good. It's not a good look.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't look good. And for those of you who missed this week's episode of the MMA Outsiders, be sure to check it out because we break that down pretty considerably in length, and how that impacts a potential fight between him and Stipe Miocic for later this year. But because this is the Tough Enough stream, you guys don't care about that. You guys can check that out later. Let's move on to what is going to be the final middleweight fight of the first round of the competition. It's a pretty interesting one. It's one that you and I predicted would end up being the last fight, and when they were both geniuses on that part, because it was process of elimination. These are the only two guys left. We got Paddy McCrory out of Ireland versus Mark Holm out of South Africa. Tom, what are your early impressions of this fight? And do you think, because I personally do, that this is the most evenly matched middleweight fight so far out of the competition? What do you think?
Yeah, this one's pretty even. Um, Dana White has mentioned that once again, this is going to be a typical striker versus grappler, which seems to have been a theme throughout part of the second half of the first round fight. You got Patty McCory, who was described as a brawler, taking on Mark Holm, who's got an excellent wrestling background. So, and you could tell there's even some tension there. Patty and Mark, stared at each other pretty well. They almost got into it with a little bit of fisticuffs, had to be, held back by the commission. I'm pretty excited for this one. Um, I feel like Holmes' experience with his grappling, though, might give him a little bit of an edge in this fight. Obviously, we talked about how Ryan Loder seemed to have how good of a job he did against Tom Theocaris. No other way to say it, because Ryan Loder got the win in a minute. I don't think it's going to play out that badly, but I still would give a little bit of an edge to Holm, and I could see him probably getting a decision win. And that's my early prediction.
Okay, I'm gonna go the other way on you and take Patty McCrory. I just think that his confidence to get in there has been brewing throughout the entire season so far. He seems to be a very supportive teammate, and he's obviously someone who's super flashy in his fighting style. And I think he has his eye on the prize, if you will, as to what he wants to do. And he's been chomping at the bit to fight home. And I think he's just counting down the days, the minutes, the hours until the fight actually happens. And I don't mean to be incredibly biased, but I do think that the UFC needs a bit more of an Irish invasion, considering that the biggest superstar in MMA is currently not competing at the moment. So in order to ignite the country, is Patty McCrory the answer? We're gonna and soon if he's somebody that could potentially have a long career in the UFC, but you can't have a long career in the UFC unless you win on the Ultimate Fighter or Dana White's Contender Series, and that's the scenario he has here. For all of those reasons, and for all of those reasons alone, I like the Irishman to get the win, and I like Russo's team, if you will, to improve to a 2-fight edge moving into the following week's episode, which will close out the month of July. Well, we're gonna go. We're gonna go opposite for next week.
So here's my question: if that
Okay.
happens, who do you see switching sides?
What do you mean? Who do I see switching sides?
If it's 5-3 in favor, I mean, maybe the circumstances are going to depend because of the weight class. But if it's 5-3, if Shevchenko has a 2-fighter edge, don't they make a fighter switch sides, switch camps?
I don't know. I don't know if switching sides would be the case, but you could see a scenario where maybe because the fighter wins, it's up to the coaches as to who wants to pick first. So you never know. Because remember, the coaches have to debrief before my
I know.
final matchups are announced, and then
hmm
and then they would determine who picks first. But that's a good question. So
I mean, I think I remember last season. Because didn't Connor have a teammate last season? Oh, it was Katana, I think. Katana ended up switching.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Well,
So,
yeah, if that scenario plays out, then sure. But so far, it doesn't seem like we've had a scenario where that could come up. But you're not wrong in assuming that could be a possibility for sure.
yeah, for sure. All right. So that's going to do it for this edition of Tough Enough. Again, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ETB Network. Give a follow, give a like on Facebook and X. Of course, again, that's Zain, Sporting News, MMA Knockout, BJ Penn, Anton Albano, MMA News, Fan-Sided MMA, and my work on the PFL website. Make sure to go to etbpodcast.com for more on the network, logs, and of course, you can listen to the main show of ours, the MMA Outsiders, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Premium, and so much more. But that is going to do it. That's going to wrap us up for another edition of Tough Enough. As you mentioned, Zain, next week is the last fight of the first round. After that, we're into the semifinals. We're a step closer to finding out our 2 ultimate fighters for this season.
For sure, we're a step closer to finding our 2 ultimate fighters for the season. And if you want to keep following them, be sure to tune back in every single week after every episode of The Ultimate Fighter for this very show. For Tom, I'm Zain, and we will see you guys soon. Have a good one.
Take care, all.